the top of the hour. We will give it just another minute as we still have people dialing in. So we'll begin in just one moment. Okay, everyone, it's 1 minute after the hour. Let's go ahead and get started with our first MillerKnoll Design Perspectives. I'm Alan Almassey, the MillerKnoll Practice Director for Architecture and Commercial Real Estate, and we have the good fortune of having with us Amy Auscherman, the Director of Archives and Brand Heritage. And in this month's Design Perspectives, Amy is going to share with us some background about Miller and Knoll and Herman Miller and Knoll and some of the design leaders that were part of these two design-led brands who were collaborating in the middle of the last century and really setting the table for this match made in heaven that happened this year in 2022 that became MillerKnoll. But before I hand it over to Amy, I just wanted to give some context around Design Perspectives. This is actually the first in a series, and Design Perspectives will be a monthly virtual series that we will bring to you. And it's on all things related to design. This could be design history. This could be bringing to you designers that we collaborate with, 21st century designers. It could be research and workplace issues. It could be core values such as sustainability and inclusion in the workplace and a variety of other topics. So we certainly hope that you join us for future calls. Another thing to note that the MillerKnoll Design Perspectives will bring to you ideas and insights from all of the MillerKnoll family of brands. And just for context, and you can see on the screen, that means obviously Herman Miller as well as Knoll, which we'll primarily be talking about today, but you can see all of the other brands that are now part of MillerKnoll, ranging from Geiger to Muuto to Holly Hunt to Maharam to Knoll Textiles to Hay, so on and so forth. So we certainly hope that as specifiers, you find product solutions all with a common thread of original modern design within this product portfolio, and you will hear from the brands on future calls. But starting Design Perspectives at the very beginning, we thought we would take a look back in history with Amy on a presentation that has been developed called the Cranbrook Connection. Amy, I will turn it over to you. And one more thing before I do, I should mention to the audience, there will be Q&A that we'll do at the end. So if, as Amy's going through the presentation, you have specific questions, go ahead and enter them in chat. Evelyn Wiley and I will keep an eye on those and then ask Amy those questions at the end of the presentation. So without further ado, over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Alan. And now the fun aspect of getting my window shared and asking everybody if you can see my screen.
We can see your screen, yes.
Okay. All right, here we go. Alan, thank you for that, that introduction. I'm going to talk a little bit today about what I think is kind of the genesis story of MillerKnoll, that the stage was set at mid-century. These are two early advertisements from both of our companies that happen also to be some of my favorite, but I hope today kind of illuminates truly what I think is the inevitability of this merger, and for me as a design historian, kind of a dream come true. I manage the archive, started out just at Herman Miller. Now my remit is Herman Miller, Knoll, and in a way, all of the brands. But we do have a pretty extensive corporate archive at Herman Miller, which here you're seeing in our vault in Zealand. We've kept everything from furniture molds to advertisements, but this is the stuff that kind of makes the history tangible and is also frequently used not only for marketing purposes, education, product development, but it's truly unique that not only Herman Miller, but also Knoll, which again is now under our umbrella of responsibility and keeping this history. But Knoll also, much to my excitement, has also kept a pretty extensive corporate archives that again ranges everything from design drawings to tooling, which you see here for the pedestal table, to all of the amazing old catalogs. So we're in the process of sort of getting our arms around what Knoll has kept. And also, again, for me, it's pretty fun to see what they've kept of their own history. Kind of a little bit of my background that feels very Miller-Knoll, but my first job was digitizing the archive for the Miller House and Garden. No relation to Herman Miller, but this was a project that some of the sort of founding designers of both companies had a hand in. So this home in Columbus, Indiana, maybe some of you have been to it, or you've seen this very famous conversation pit on Pinterest, perhaps. But this was a home where the two listed architects on the project are Alexander Girard and Eero Saarinen. Charles and Ray Eames also had a hand in this house. You see a Eames compact sofa kind of there in the background that they kind of redesigned for the home, but mostly just to say, or to set the stage, that all of these designers, you know, despite working for at the time what were competing companies, actually were collaborators, friends, and were informing and working on some of the same projects. Here you see another aspect of the home. I love this fireplace, but the furniture in the home changed over the years many times, but obviously you see some classics from Knoll as well. And here in their cool TV room where they have some old Stevens chairs, a custom Alexander Girard coffee table, and an Eames lounge. But again, this was a project that, you know, these designers that we know so well today were working on from 1954 to 1957. And frankly, for me, was an amazing first project as a design education that also, again, makes a lot of sense today for what we're talking about. There were also some now kind of iconic products that were kind of experimented with at the Miller House. So I would say that Eero Saarinen was starting his ideas for the pedestal series at the Miller House. So this was their dining table. And again, you know, this is before that furniture line was actually introduced, years before. But again, this house was an experimenting ground for ideas that came to pass in the future. But what we're mostly going to speak about today is Cranbrook. This is a view of the art museum and the library. It's an art school in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. And this is where our protagonists all sort of met. So this campus was designed by Eero Saarinen, so father of Eero Saarinen. The Saarinens moved over from Finland. They were engaged by George Booth, who was a newspaper man in West Michigan, and really wanted to build kind of an educational community, and also was an architecture fan. So Saarinen at the time was sort of the elder Saarinen, was gaining fame in the United States, and he and his family moved over to complete this project. But young Eero Saarinen was working on projects such as lighting and furniture for some of these buildings. Loya Saarinen, his mother, was a sculptor and a textile, did weaving, but was a textile designer. So it was a real family affair. And I think really is the seeds for the total design approach that Knoll is so well known for today. Florence then Schust, later Knoll, was a student here. And I like to show these views of the Kingswood School for Girls, where she went in elementary school. And I mean, I just like to say, you see these rooms that are spectacular, and you kind of understand how Florence became the true genius that she is. But again, these were rooms and interiors that the entire Saarinen family were collaborating on, from young Eero designing these amazing the lunchroom seating and the tables, to Loya's weaving there in the background. I just love to think about Florence's middle school drama playing out in these very amazing rooms. But, you know, a picture to show proof that these people all did in fact know one another. We have the Saarinen family, Loya and Eliel, along with Eero, and then Florence. And by this time she was married to Hans Knoll, but Florence was, she was adopted by the Saarinen family essentially after being orphaned. She grew up in Michigan and decided after visiting Cranbrook that that is where she wanted to go, but showed kind of she was a genius even then and knew that she wanted to be an architect. And so with Eliel Saarinen hearing that, really brought her in, took her to Europe in the summers with their family, where she met people like Alvar Aalto, and then later was off to study with the greats, whether that was Mies at what is now Illinois Institute of Technology. But it was the Saarinens that really fostered her talent, enabled her to be the architect and designer that she turned into. But these protagonists, so Florence, Eero, later Charles and Ray, and Harry Bertoia, were all students around the same time, kind of some coming in and out at different times, but just to kind of set the stage that these people were learning together, collaborating, and in some cases stayed lifelong friends. So this, you see, is Charles Eames right there crouching here in the Cranbrook Design Laboratory, as it was called. And so Charles was both teaching and doing research. The chair behind him that you see actually was some of the first collaborations between Saarinen and Eames while they were at Cranbrook. So Charles and Eero were completing some projects for Eliel's architectural projects, whether that was Kleinshaan Music Hall in Buffalo or the Crow Island School. But you start to see the both of them experiment with what we would now call ergonomics. So not only are they looking at the way the body is positioned in a seat and how to make it comfortable, but from a material exploration standpoint, this was also kind of the seeds that would go on to inform both of their work. Both designers obviously being influenced at the time by somebody like Alvar Aalto, who was experimenting with molding plywood. But these projects are, you know, early experiments in seating for both, but again, kind of reiterate the fact that these designers kind of came up together. There's this great quote from architect Peter Blake: just as the abstract expressionists moved the center of gravity for modern art from Paris to New York, so Eero Saarinen and Charles Eames at almost the same moment shifted the center of gravity of modern design from Western Europe to North America. So a lot of these, you know, as I said, the Saarinens came over from Finland. You also had instructors from the Bauhaus relocating to the United States post-war, establishing themselves in places like Chicago and New York. But this was a time when, you know, modern design was really taking off in America, and the rest of the world was being informed by the designers who were practicing here. Obviously, people like the Eameses and Saarinen being informed by some European sensibilities, but it really was America sort of moving the needle at mid-century. And so I think a pretty consequential project that Charles and Eero worked on, in addition to other students in the Cranbrook School at the time. I know Ray was around here at the same time. She came to study initially. She was a painter and was studying in New York, but came to the Cranbrook School, which was really an open curriculum. People could learn whatever they wanted, and that's how she met Charles and sort of honed her own total design skills, and that she wasn't just fixated on painting or textiles, but she was helping in industrial design as well. And so those designers collaborated on an entry for the Organic Design for Home Furnishings exhibition that was held at MoMA in 1941. And so you see here kind of the shapes and the ideas, the materials that both Saarinen, Eames, and others would go on to sort of perfect. But you see the modular storage in the background. You see wooden, Charles and Eero were very keen on trying to mold plywood, not just two ways, but create 3D plywood molding processes, which you see here, where they're not just bending it one way, they're trying to create an actual shell of a seat out of wood. And so I think here, for me, you see the beginnings of the Eames shell chairs or the beginnings of Eero Saarinen's womb chair, but also experimentations in modularity, whether that's for seating or for storage. And so, the Eameses went off to California. Eero Saarinen was practicing architecture, but also was engaged by his old friend, Florence Knoll, who had gone at that point to work with Hans Knoll, and sort of redefined their business. But the way I like to describe it is, Herman Miller had George Nelson as sort of a creative director or a design director, and Florence was truly that for Knoll, engaging her pretty talented friends from the past to start designing pieces for the company. This early one being the grasshopper chair, which again, he's experimenting with 3D or with molding plywood, but also creating a lounge setting. The Eameses, like I said, they took their molded plywood kind of dreams and moved out to California and further refined these processes, and eventually got to the molded plywood furniture that they're so well known for today. But Charles ended up working in the film industry for a short time, and Ray was meanwhile working back at their apartment / experimentation laboratory, trying to figure out how to create a 3D plywood molded chair, which they ended up doing and created, I think, one of the most iconic pieces of furniture of all time. I like to point out, too, that there were creatives that were moving and working kind of for both companies, or started in one place and then ended up in another. So this is an amazing collage that was done by a designer named Herbert Matter, who for a brief time was working with the Eames office doing photography and other design work. But Matter would then go on to work with Knoll and collaborate closely with Florence Knoll on showroom designs, and executed some of their iconic advertisements. So fiberglass ended up being another material that both designers at Knoll and designers then for Herman Miller were working with. So I think something too about Cranbrook being really an open curriculum and encouraging students to experiment meant that, in post-war America, where you had a material like fiberglass that at the time was being used for something like an airplane, then start to be reimagined for consumer goods. But this is Ray Eames working on Le Chaise, that unfortunately was not commercialized at the time, but really got them to kind of a good place with fiberglass that then would allow them to come up with their shell chair, which at around or a little bit before Eero Saarinen was using fiberglass for the womb chair. So inside the upholstered shell of the womb chair is fiberglass. So again, just to reiterate that, both were sort of looking at one another and using the learnings from Cranbrook to continue these material explorations that again lead to some of our most iconic products. Here again is Saarinen, this time with Florence, looking at a base of the pedestal table. But something that's interesting to me about Saarinen's work and sort of his beginnings were he initially wanted to be a sculptor. His mother was a sculptor. And I think you really get that sense through his furniture design work for Knoll, where kind of looks great from any angle or allows you a new view, but really everything is considered no matter where you're viewing the piece from. The Eameses, I would say, kind of took a more off-the-shelf approach in a way with some projects, which is evidenced here by their house in Pacific Palisades, where they're using, I kind of like to say, perhaps it's crass, but like imagine going to Home Depot and getting everything you need and designing your own house and building it. So they're using windows, kind of more industrial looking materials for the time to create this kind of perfect glass box in a way for all of their collections. I also just love to show this early interior of the Eames house where the Eameses themselves were living with a womb chair, and this predates their own molded plywood lounge chair, the 670, by a few years. So again, just to reiterate, they were friends, admirers of each other's work, even after they went to work for different companies. And there was, I would say, a very, very friendly, competitive nature between Eames and Saarinen as they went off and sort of developed in their own careers. So as Charles says here, Eero had a very competitive nature and would call me very early in the morning, his time, and start to describe an idea for a chair. This was his general spirit of staking claim. So by this time, the Eameses were in LA, Saarinen was in Detroit, so he's probably calling Charles and Ray at like 3 in the morning to try to talk about a chair. Here's another story. There was a situation in which he had a full-size drawing on the back of a door, and he gave me a split-second view of it. It was in the dark, and he turned the light on and off, pop, pop. Then he asked me to describe the whole situation. As far as he was concerned, that 10th of a second view is all you needed. So again, just thinking about these situations where the designers were showing each other what they were working on for other companies, but also probably lending opinions here and there of how to do things different. I love this quote from Eero Saarinen where he's referencing the pedestal group. I've been working evenings and have a whole wall full of sketches. I have come up with an idea that I think will wipe Herman Miller off the map. I love that. And a story from around the time, or as talked about internally, is George Nelson was working on sort of a similar pedestal shape for Herman Miller. And once Eero beat him to the punch, kind of completely abandoned the project. But here's Eero sitting at the pedestal table in his Victorian home that was on the campus of Cranbrook. This is his second wife, Aline, who was a PR genius and kind of built his reputation as an architect, and their son, Eames. So again, another proof point that these people were very close, so much so that they named their son after Charles. Kind of just another fun anecdote. Alexander Girard did not go to Cranbrook, but had opened a design shop in, at that time, Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and was also creating textile designs that at one point Florence Knoll had licensed for Knoll Textiles. And then you see her sitting here with her famous dog car tree, and the coffee table that she has in front of her was actually designed by Alexander Girard, marketed by Knoll at the time. It was taken out of the line for decades, but now is again part of Knoll's offer. And again, just another designer that we share between our rosters. So between these two companies, you know, both sort of had this tall task of getting people, the American public, so to say, at the time, to accept these what were radical looking pieces of furniture in their home. So I've read anecdotes that, you know, the Eames molded plywood chair, some people could not understand how it even would be able to support them, let alone be comfortable. Or even something like the Noguchi coffee table that at that point, you know, it's ubiquitous now, but definitely looks like it could be from outer space. But, you know, the way that Florence Knoll designed her showrooms and the way that George Nelson designed theirs was really creating these sort of vignettes and inspiration for how people could actually style, live with, and outfit their own homes with these designs. So not only were they inventive about the processes and the materials that they were using and the designs, but also how to sell them. So I think both companies, were riffing off one another in some ways, but you have Eero Saarinen coming up with his Series 70 chairs that also offered a variety of bases so that you could put them in different contexts, whether it was an office or a dining room. And then the Eameses, who kind of built their whole sort of point of view on a systematic approach of, today the shell chair line between upholstered, non-upholstered, whatever base, whatever, there's over 1 million options of how you could specify that. But they were very much into creating a kit of parts where people could really get what they needed out of the piece and specify for where they needed it. And then you even have a similar approach in the advertising, where on the left you have an ad for Herbert Matter, where it's this sort of more abstract approach, but you're also seeing the variety of colors, materials, finishes, how tall or how short a table could be. And then in the ad on the right that was designed by Irving Harper, he too is sort of showing the breadth and depth of the Eames line and telling you how many different options there are. But I think for, when it comes to approaches to the office, which both companies, had a hand in kind of inventing the modern office. Florence Knoll has this quote: "If you look at Herman Miller and Knoll's work, they took one approach and we took another. Ours was based on planning. That was due to me. I saw the development of the furniture in the sense of a need for a total job. Charles Eames and George Nelson saw it in the sense of an individual piece." And so Florence's approach with the planning unit really was taking, a considered approach to everything from the walls, colors, to designing pieces of furniture itself, should they need it, to really creating a program for people. And this was kind of around the same time that Herman Miller was working with Robert Probst, who you see here on the right at his Action Office desk. But Probst was sort of considering, what does an office worker need to do their job? This was at a time when, paper was becoming voluminous in the office, and white collar work was sort of crystallizing as this thing that happened in an office. And so Action Office 1 on the left was Probst and Nelson's first approach at addressing the different vectors of work, as Probst kind of claimed it. Sometimes you need to be sitting down and chit-chatting. Sometimes you need to be collaborating at your stand-up desk. You also need storage. So, Action Office 1, while beautiful, kind of was still trying to solve the problem of the open office with just furniture. And so commercially that didn't do so well, but that sent Probst back to the drawing board to sort of further flesh out the more panel-based approach that he was experimenting with early on. But then we eventually get to Action Office 2 in 1968, which some people, or I think correctly, is really the first office system. And so this was, in the way that I think Florence Knoll so well was creating this sort of interior architecture and considered spaces, Probst too was trying to get at that with this panel-based system that utilized vertical storage, and created, these office spaces. You see here Florence's approach in one of her more famous projects, Connecticut General Life Insurance Company. But, again, they're creating these interior spaces in the way then that Action Office 2, which this is an image from 1970, is also trying to get at that approach. So, in my mind, if I think about now the opportunity for MillerKnoll, we have sort of Probst's approach when it comes to creating, furniture that or systems that help people kind of do their best at work, versus Florence's total design approach, where she's creating, entire spaces that are considered down to the environments themselves. I think too, from a media perspective, both companies, again, as I mentioned earlier, like, how do you sell this stuff? Charles and Ray Eames were prolific filmmakers, but some of their earliest experiments in film were creating these sort of, I would say, commercials for Herman Miller, showing the chair. The still is from one where it's kind of stop motion, where you see the chair built from the ground up, from the base. You see all the connecting parts and pieces, and then very conveniently, it ends with the man in the chair reading his newspaper. Versus, I love this still from a film called The Moon is Blue, where Patty O'Neill is shown in the womb chair, which Eero Saarinen designed, but I would say Florence, as we see here, was really the one responsible for the brief. I told Eero I was sick and tired of the one-dimensional lounge chair, long and narrow. I said I want a chair I can sit in sideways, or any other way I want to sit in it. And to me, that's kind of this lovely nod, in a way, to feminism, and that, she's curled up in the chair how she wants to be, and it's comfortable. And The Moon is Blue itself was a little bit of a women's liberation film, or a nod to it. And then, so, again, kind of an example of another project that these designers were intersecting on. Dulles Airport was designed by Saarinen, and at the time of design, they were having issues with finding appropriate airport seating, and that was sort of the design prompt for the Eames office to come up with the Eames tandem seating that was installed for opening, and is now, we see it anytime we travel today. But it's easy to clean. It's the systematic approach, in a way, that, again, from an aesthetic standpoint, fits very nicely into this kind of what looks like, space age sculptural space. Which brings us to today, and kind of why we're here. But I mean, all of this sort of being kind of the proof, or, the fun stories about how and why this merger, in a way, at least to me as a historian, is somewhat inevitable, in that the DNA of both companies kind of comes from the same place. There was an amazing exhibition in 1975 at Cranbrook called Knoll, Herman Miller, The Development of Modern Furniture, which you see here, really positions the two separate but together. And I think, too, kind of a great nod to the fact that both of these brands will continue to live on and inspire one another and live alongside, but kind of showing you that, they always have been acknowledged as the leaders in modern. And something that is exciting is that we are once again collaborating with Cranbrook on a research fellowship that will sort of offer a reimagined or updated version of this exhibition through a research fellowship. So hopefully in a couple of years, we'll be seeing something similar, but also giving the story of mid-century modernism, which, again, these two companies sit at the center of, and really are ground zero, so to say, for these ideas. And then, just for fun, this is a slide from the Library of Congress Eames collection, but one more proof point that these people truly were friends. It's Ray Eames and Eero Saarinen ripping a cig, as usual, at the Aspen Design Fest in 1950. But just a nice moment, and can only imagine what they were talking about at that time, premier design gathering of the best practitioners. So that is the end of my hopefully fun history lecture. Alan, I'll turn it over to you for any questions.
Sure. So we've got a few questions in the chat, and I actually have one that was texted to me on my phone. So let's go to Q&A, and if others have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. One, I think you addressed somewhat in your presentation, but it was around who invented the first office system. So you talked about Florence Knoll's concept of the entire environment. You talked about Bob Probst's development of Action Office, and that they are two different approaches. And I don't know if you could say one is a first or if they happen simultaneously, but how would you respond to that question, Amy?
I mean, the planning unit predated Herman Miller Research Corporation. So I would say that from an approach of how to design an office and the spaces and the tools that people need, in a way, Florence was kind of there before, and really considering it. I think Probst is credited with inventing, the first office system, and that it was this system kit of parts that again was meant to respond to the user's individual needs. So I think they were definitely playing off one another, similar but different approaches. I mean, frankly, looking back in feedback from after when Action Office was initially launched, there was a lot of questions from customers of what colors should I pick for my space, or where do I put plants, or how do I hang art? So really bringing sort of what Florence was doing already with the planning unit when it came to creating a total beautiful, totally considered space. And as I said, I feel like now it's the best of both worlds because we have the genius of both to now work together.
Yeah, exactly. So the next question, best of both worlds again, you referenced at the beginning of the presentation your role with the archives, the Herman Miller archives. You referenced some of the Knoll archival material. But the question from the guest is there a full Knoll archives? If so, where is it? And I personally would add, and what might be under development if any of our guests want to come visit us.
There are Knoll archives, which is like, the greatest for me. It's super fun. It's sort of like Indiana Jonesing, but Knoll and Herman Miller are so similar from a culture standpoint where, people who worked at both companies kind of knew they were making history as it happened. So it almost makes it easy for me because I walked into Knoll and there's a very great, very well organized, very comprehensive archive similar to Herman Miller, where it's advertisements, it's photography, it's design drawings, it's actual pieces of furniture. So that collection is now, a lot of it is in New York, some of it is in East Greenville. And we're kind of at the beginning stages of wrapping our arms around what is there and using it. I think Knoll has been also great at leveraging their heritage for design storytelling. So again, it's like a dream come true for me.
Exactly. And would it be safe to say that we are exploring what a blended client experience could look like with the archives?
I mean, TBD. I think we're looking at how that comes to life in our many homes that we have. So TBD.
TBD. Okay, more to come on that one. All right, next question, switching gears, is are there any discontinued designs that will be re-released? Which I think is a perfect question because Amy, having an eye on the archives, probably has an idea of, what may be a consideration. Or Amy, I would take this step further. Are there specific products that you would lobby for a re-release?
I can't say that I am at liberty to share at this point anything concrete. However, I mean, I'll just put a vote in for, there's an amazing Isamu Noguchi light that he designed for Knoll in the 40s that is super cool that I've been bugging our product development team. I feel like we sell tons of them. And Noguchi is personally one of my favorite designers that,
Sure.
again, conveniently, now between Herman Miller and Knoll, we have like all of his commercial work outside of Akari. So yeah, the Noguchi lamp.
I know, right? We need to get those Akari light sculptures in our collection. Okay, next question, and I think this is a really good question. First, thank you for the great presentation, but I'm curious if you think there was anything particular about the Cranbrook School that made it produce such legends of designs?
Good
Or was the school just
question.
prestigious enough to attract the talent?
Well, I think that, you know, the Saarinen family, or Eliel Saarinen, was already pretty famous in the design world. And he was also the one, for example, who invited Charles Eames to study at Cranbrook. So Eames, you know, was excited to go there and sort of have an open curriculum, and that he was studying architecture in St. Louis at a more formalized like Beaux Arts school, and he got kicked out because he was a Frank Lloyd Wright fan. And so that was completely against what they were teaching at in his program, versus, you know, if anybody's familiar with Frank Lloyd Wright, who also takes a total design approach. You look at Cranbrook, where every building is considered, from the door handle to the lighting to the chairs to the designs on the windows. And so I think the Saarinens were a big draw. I think the self-driven way that the school operated attracted interesting people. So, for example, Ray Eames, who was studying abstract expressionist painting and was a founding member of the abstract expressionist group in New York. She was studying under Hans Hofmann. She heard from her friend Ben Baldwin, who was ended up being a famous designer, to come and kind of check out what they were doing there. You had Harry Bertoia, who was initially working, you know, he was a metal smither, and then got to go to Cranbrook and sort of flex not only his sculpting kind of interests, but also obviously got him in the more industrial design world, in addition to his, you know, continuing his sculpture practice that's pretty prolific as well. So I just think it was the cool place to be. It was sort of like the Bauhaus, the Midwest Bauhaus. So you had smart people that kind of wanted to just experiment, and that was the place where they could do it.
To several more questions, Amy. So let's hope we can get to most of these. The next one I like too, they're all really good questions, is, so as you begin to sift through the Knoll archives, what are you most excited about?
All of it. I mean, I think getting a better sense of what Knoll has kept. I know there's a lot. So, I mean, looking at all of the really cool Herbert Matter and Vignelli, and like truly every great, you know, design office is now represented under the MillerKnoll umbrella. And so I'm just, you know, I love research and truly am brand fans of all of the brands that are in the MillerKnoll universe now. So just all the research that we'll get to do. And I think the research fellowship with Cranbrook is going to be really amazing, and sort of finding cool stories to tell, and even more sort of proof points of how these companies make so much sense together.
Absolutely. The next question, I think we've already addressed to some degree. Any plans for MillerKnoll Museum? So we are thinking about how it's represented in our various homes in a more public-facing way. Next question, how would you say Knoll shaped workplace in the last 3 years?
Ooh, that might be, frankly, a question for Joseph White and team that would probably have a better.
Exactly. Well, you know, I would say obviously a lot of things have changed in workplace in the last 3 years, and you know, both Herman Miller and Knoll before the merger and acquisition came into it with points of view. One thing I can share with the group, if you haven't seen it, there's a print piece. This is the third annual print piece that Knoll just released called Knoll Works on the Workplace. And we're actually getting ready to both organizations are collaborating on a point of view and some tools around workplace that we'll be sharing on an upcoming Design Perspectives call, and that through any of our sellers, you can find more information this fall and into the winter on that. Another question, it's a fingers crossed that has 4 hearts. Would MillerKnoll ever host something at Cranbrook? We would love to, right? It would certainly be a destination to host something. Was George Nelson ever part of this group? And I'm thinking, that Cranbrook group of designers.
He was in that, he never studied at Cranbrook. I have a feeling, Eero Saarinen went and studied at Yale, and I'm thinking that there was perhaps a little bit of crossover there between Nelson and Saarinen, but it was Nelson who sort of identified the Eameses as talent early on, and there's great correspondence in the archives of both Hans Knoll and DJ Dupree kind of pleading with Ray and Charles to be the distributors of their molded plywood furniture. And so Nelson was the kind of, in the way that Florence was for Knoll, the creative director, identifying and recruiting talent to design for the companies. So not a Cranbrook student, but he kind of came later on and definitely was friendly with all of these folks and worked.
So Harry asked, he would love to hear about how Isamu Noguchi ended up designing for both Herman Miller and Knoll.
Ooh, I love that question. And frankly, it's one that I hope when I get further into the Knoll archives, and perhaps my colleagues there already know. But when it comes to Herman Miller, again, George Nelson was sort of identifying talent at that time for his new Herman Miller collection that was coming out in the late 40s, and Noguchi had designed a similar table for A. Conger Goodyear, who was president, I believe, of MoMA. And so Nelson knew Noguchi just from being in New York. Noguchi was also a great sort of salesman of himself. And Nelson kind of asked him, hey, can I put that in the line? Or if you have any ideas, there's also a show called something about chess. And so Noguchi designed this crazy chess table that was on display. Nelson bought one and then ended up trying to commercialize it for Herman Miller. I believe on the Knoll side, Hans Knoll was sort of hot on Noguchi, trying to get him to design for the company. And then we get the rocking stool that comes out of that was turned later into the table. And like I said, the lamp. But I mean, I think it's just a further testament that all of these designers and ideas were kind of floating around. And like I said, now it's a dream come true for me because they're all in those projects, and those design stories are now my great privilege to talk about and to kind of share.
Right. So a question here from Denise Rush, an old friend of mine from Chicago who's now in Boston. Are there any plans to leverage the Vitra miniature collection of Herman Miller and Knoll products to celebrate this merger, specifically as a teaching tool for design schools?
Ooh, not that I'm aware of at the moment, but they are cute, and I know that they're very popular. And if I'm honest, I wish we beat them to that. But
right.
Vitra as a design museum has been good at that sort of stuff.
Next question. I think these are good, and it's a similar vein to some of the ones about Noguchi and Nelson. Harry
Mhm.
Bertoia worked with both Herman Miller and Knoll. Can you speak to the way he worked with each company?
Yeah, so if anybody's read Bertoia's biography, there's kind of some drama there. And Bertoia went and worked out in LA with the Eames office and was really helpful and instrumental in their experimentations with wire. But I think there was some internal conflict at the Eames office once Charles Eames had his one-man furniture show at MoMA in 1946. And kind of similar to today, some of the designers working in the office felt a bit slighted and like they didn't get credit for their work. And so you had sort of this exodus from the Eames office at that time. People like Bertoia decided to go out on their own, and conveniently around the same time, got a call from Florence Knoll to come back out east and sort of work on the design team for Knoll. So, I think a fun connection point, but again, just kind of shows the ideas that were flowing between the companies. But Harry Bertoia, for example, designed and made Charles and Ray Eames's wedding bands for one another while they were at Cranbrook. So, designer, architect, lots of strong personalities and ideas. But yeah.
Definitely. So our next one starts with greetings from Singapore. So love Singapore, and glad we have somebody joining us from overseas. So this question goes in a different direction. I am curious if there are any records on how Ray and Charles handled conflict and disagreements in their design process.
I guess if it's between if they mean between Charles and Ray, this is kind of one of those instances where, I don't think Ray got her due early on, obviously, but they very much were collaborators. And for me personally, looking at the Eames work, like Ray as a sculptor, Ray as a painter, her sense of color and form really are sort of the final, she perfected sort of everything. So
Mhm.
I don't know that there's paper evidence of drama between them or necessarily people in their offices other than oral histories. But I think they were true collaborators. And even Charles over the years quoted as saying, anything I could do, Ray could do better. And so I think for me as a historian and sort of doing some reparative work, making sure that the people who were part of these design crews get their due.
And they came at it from such different perspectives that it was a powerful combination. So one final question, Amy. Um, there was a question or two earlier about archival pieces that might be re-released. But the final question would be, was there anything that you've seen from your work that was developed but never released in the first place that might be a favorite of yours or you would like to see produced more broadly?
I mean,
I can think of one.
what's yours?
Well, and maybe this is more of a re-release. There were the Eames plywood collection. I've seen some pieces that were done in a rosewood that I think would be, I don't know if that would be sustainably correct, but
We
those were
can't
just
do rosewood
beautiful.
anymore, Alan, because we
I
have to save the
know.
rainforests.
I know.
No, but I think if we some of the pieces from the organic design competition, some of the storage and some of the molded plywood pieces, that the point of that exhibition from MoMA was to pair the designers with manufacturers to get the stuff made. However, what kind of stopped the Eames and Saarinen pieces from being marketed were even then the molded plywood process was still not up to snuff. And so
Uh-huh.
I like to say now the shell chair that is made of molded plywood today is sort of like we got to what Ray, Charles, and Eero kind of were going for at the outset. We were finally able to do it. But I like some of those pieces, some of the organic pieces. And like I said, keep saying the Noguchi lamp. But yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Amy, thank you so much for being on our maiden voyage of MillerKnoll Design Perspectives. I think this was a terrific place to start. For the audience, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Hopefully you found this educational and inspirational. And I would say mark your calendars and keep an eye on your inbox for an invitation for the September 29th MillerKnoll Design Perspectives. We have 7.5, which is a design team from Berlin, talking about their studio and some new 21st century products that they have in store for all of you. So
future archives for me.
yes, 100%. You're already thinking ahead. So okay, well, thank you, Amy. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you in September.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.